Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's time to dial in. Welcome back to another episode. It's your host with the most, the football Google, the big guy himself, Colin O'Callahan. We're 3 weeks away from the playoffs. We have two teams that have already clinched, and 12 more spots are still wide open. Nobody has yet to clinch a division title, which is absolutely shocking, but hopefully in the next week or so that will be able to change. So without further ado, let's jump right into the show. I'm going to share the screen right here and here we go. Got the schedule right set in stone. Let's start with tonight's matchup that's coming up in 5 hours and 15 minutes. We got the Los Angeles Rams taking on the Seattle Seahawks. So the Rams went up against the Detroit Lions at home last Sunday, and they started off slow. Matthew Stafford threw an interception on the opening drive to Aiden Hutchinson. They were down by as much as 10 in the first half, but they ended up only trailing by 7 at the break. And then in the second half, the offense kicked into gear. The defense really slowed the Lions offense down through most of the second half. And while they did only win by 7, the Rams just had a lot more firepower offensively and defensively. They shut down the run. They held Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery to like maybe 57 combined rushing yards or something number. It was below 100, that's for damn sure. And really the only two receivers that made any sort of impact in that game whatsoever were Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams. And the Rams, on the other hand, Puka Nacua was absolutely explosive. Kyren Williams and Blake Corum combined for nearly 150 rushing yards. But the downside was they lost Devontae Adams in that game to a hamstring injury. He's doubtful to play tonight. But Sean McVay did say that they wasn't going to immediately rule him out. So we'll see what happens in that regard. But Seattle Seahawks, they are coming off an ugly win against Phillip Rivers and the Indianapolis Colts. If you told me that they weren't going to be able to run the football extremely well and that the offense wouldn't score a touchdown, I'd say, okay, Indianapolis might be able to save their season. But, Phillip Rivers, he had his moments. He had a nice touchdown pass to Josh Downs. He had a big back shoulder throw to Alec Pierce on the final drive, but only finished with 120 yards. It took a 60-yard field goal from Blake Grupe for Indianapolis to take a last-minute lead. And after the Seahawks took the lead with like 18 seconds left to go, Phillip Rivers, threw a back-breaking interception to Kobe Bryant that sealed the deal, and Seattle was able to hang on. Sam Darnold didn't have that bad of a game for the most part, threw for over 270 yards, but, I don't really think the struggles were on his part, but the fact that they, continue to show their inconsistencies has me really worried for this game, because against the Rams, you cannot afford to stumble into another self-inflicted defeat, because that's exactly what happened the last time they played the Rams at SoFi Stadium. Sam Darnold threw 4 interceptions. They only scored 1 touchdown. And the fact that it took a 61-yard field goal attempt for them to, barely lose the game is just flat out damning. But it also showed that this upcoming matchup is going to be a defensive grudge match. You know that the Seahawks have the personnel capable of slowing down Matthew Stafford. They held him to 130 yards the last time. And from Sam Darnold's perspective, as long as you don't turn the football over, and if you can really just keep the ball out of harm's way, then you're going to be able to, stay in this fight for the long run. And you cannot put the Rams in short field position, because they're going to just take advantage of that in a heartbeat. So the Seattle Seahawks, they need a win, and they're in the playoffs. And if that doesn't happen, then they have to be Steelers fans and hope that they beat the Detroit Lions. The Rams have already clinched a playoff berth, and I don't think that another win will immediately give them the NFC West, because obviously you still have the 49ers that you have to contend with. But with that being said, I'm going to get right into the prediction. I'm going to pick the Rams to win this one. I don't think it's going to be a blowout, but more importantly, the biggest reason why I have the Rams winning this game, it's not necessarily, Matthew Stafford over Sam Darnold. It's the fact that in the last 3 times that Darnold has gone up against the Rams, he has been absolutely pitiful. And unless he finally gets over that hump and comes out of his shell and puts that team on his back to lead them to victory, then I just don't really know if he's really the guy that's going to carry you to a division title. I understand that he almost did that last year, but at the same time, when you, in the final game of the season against the Detroit Lions, you were the guy that was supposed to get Minnesota to that promised spot to get them that number 1 seed, and you only scored 9 points, and you look like a shell of yourself. And until you finally, shed that narrative and throw it in the trash, then you're going to be the underdog. So I think the Rams are going to win a very close fight here, 23-20. Now we've got 2 important Saturday matchups coming up. between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Washington Commanders. The first one will be at 5 o'clock p.m., if I'm not mistaken. And I know there aren't too many playoff implications in this one because the Washington Commanders obviously have been officially eliminated from playoff contention a couple of weeks ago. But for the Philadelphia Eagles, all they need is a win, and they would be the first team since 2004 to win the NFC East in back-to-back years. They would finally end that streak. And ironically, they were the ones that did it the last time with Andy Reid and Donovan McNabb in 2003 and 2004. And if that doesn't happen, well, you would need to be Chargers fans and hope that they can beat the Dallas Cowboys, which I think they'll do, but we'll get into that in just a few minutes. Yeah, I seriously thought that the Eagles were going to lose to the Raiders. I thought, okay, Pete Carroll hasn't lost to them in a long time. I mean, Kenny Pickett was a former backup for them. Who knows? Maybe they could do the unthinkable and give the Eagles their fourth straight loss because Philly's offense up to that point was flat out pathetic. The defense couldn't really do anything against the run, and you just thought, all right, they might show signs of 2023 all over again. But to their credit, they did not do that whatsoever. Kenny Pickett only threw for 64 yards. 9 of them were in the second half. The Raiders' offense couldn't even reach 100 in total yards of offense. The running game went nowhere. Brock Bowers didn't really do much of anything. Pickett got sacked 4 times and only threw 1 interception. Meanwhile, Jalen Hurts went 12 of 15, threw 3 touchdown passes, and the Eagles' offense actually looked respectable. I mean, I get it. It's against the worst team in the league, but finally, Philadelphia actually showed some competence and respectability. This was the type of game that, last year we would have said, okay, you should beat the crap out of them, and that's exactly what they did. And they didn't fall into another embarrassing and, hilarious trap. So kudos to them. They took care of business 31-0. The Commanders, on the other hand, they finally ended their losing streak against the New York Giants, but it just felt like they were doing everything they could towards the end to be like, here you go. We don't really want to win this game. The offense was decent. They ran the ball extremely well. Marcus Mariota threw for over 220 yards. They had a couple touchdown drives, but a lot of the damage was really done on the special teams. Younghoe Koo once again missed 2 field goals. It's exactly why he got cut and why the Giants still don't have a kicker. Jalen Lane had a huge punt return touchdown midway in the second quarter that allowed Washington to take a commanding 22-7 lead. Jake Moody ended up making a few field goal attempts, but on their final 2 drives of the game, they coughed up the ball. And not only did they let the Giants make it a 1-score game, but they actually gave them a chance to set it into overtime. But the defense, they were able to hang on. They were able to force the only turnover of the day earlier in the first half. And, Jackson Dart, had a decent performance when you look at the box score, but, they never led. And when they did have a chance to, stay in the game and, extend it longer, they couldn't really pick up a whole lot of yardage. And they failed on a critical 4th down that, all but sealed the deal. So Washington did enough, but it was by the string of their teeth. And I get it. It was a meaningless game, but at the same time, I picked them to win for a reason, and it was because I thought they had a little more depth offensively. And while they showed moments, they really let the Giants hang around for win. Closer margin than you think. So I'll say the final score is 27-17. They keep it scrappy for about 3 quarters, but Philadelphia ends up finding a way to pull away, late down the stretch because the Commanders' defense is not that good. And when you look at the firepower on Philadelphia's offense, they should have enough to, make enough plays down the stretch. But then again, who knows? So the bigger game on the docket, though, is between these two, the Green Bay Packers and the Bears. Second time in 3 weeks that these two teams will be playing each other. Green Bay threw the first punch at Lambeau Field, 28-21. But this one is really, I wouldn't say it's for all the marbles, but whoever wins this, I feel like is going to win the division because both of them need a win plus a Detroit loss to get a playoff spot. And if they win, and my indication is whoever wins next week, whether the Bears play, San Francisco or the Packers, I forget who they play. I think it might be Minnesota. Actually, no, I'm wrong. But the point is, if one of these teams wins this week, and if they get another one next week, then they might as well clinch the division. I think that's what I'm trying to say. But Green Bay is coming off an unfortunate loss to the Denver Broncos last week, and I'll get into why I say unfortunate in a couple minutes. And this was one that was winnable for them. They were up 16-14 at halftime. They were up 23-14 midway through the third quarter after a 40-yard touchdown run from Josh Jacobs. And then Jordan Love heaved a horrible interception down the field to Patrick Surtain, and it ended up swinging the entire momentum of the game because Denver went on a 20-3 scoring run through the rest of the game. Bo Nix threw 4 touchdown passes. Green Bay only kicked a field goal the rest of the game, and Jordan Love ended up finishing with 2 interceptions and only 1 touchdown pass that was early in the first half. So this was definitely a game that Green Bay just completely fell apart. They took a lot of penalties. They could have run the ball extremely well. The passing game without Christian Watson in the lineup because of a chest injury, that kind of got slowed down. And Bo Nix was just flat out incredible. Given the circumstances, I would say that was the best game of his career. But unfortunately for Green Bay, not only did they lose the game, they also lost their best defensive player, Micah Parsons, due to a torn ACL. And the reason why I feel like they're going to struggle this week against the Bears, not only did you lose Parsons, but you also lost Devontae Wyatt a few weeks back on Thanksgiving, to a season-ending injury as well. So I feel like, when you're going up against one of the best rushing teams in the league that has DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai, you kind of need these two to stop the bleeding and to make sure that, the Bears offense just doesn't have any fluidity or rhythm to it whatsoever. And without your two big guns, it's going to be hard for them to slow down the run, especially at Soldier Field. But I can literally just do a copy and paste of what I said about this game last week or 2 weeks ago, and it would just as strongly make my case because we all know what the Bears need to do. Defense needs to force a couple takeaways. They need to run the football extremely well, and Caleb Williams cannot have another up and down performance. Really, and more importantly, he's got to be the best player on that football field. And he had a chance to send the game into overtime at Lambeau Field, but he threw a back-breaking interception that sealed the deal, and that was the difference in the game. Jordan Love made plays in the fourth quarter while Caleb Williams could not. And I feel like if you can flip the script and, do so, then you'll be able to win. But Chicago's offense is a little banged up as well. They don't have Roma Dunze. They don't have Luther Burden III. So you don't really have 2 of your top receivers, but you also have DJ Moore, you got Colston Loveland and Cole Kmet, and obviously your 2 guys at running back and Monangai and DeAndre Swift. So you still have, the same core pieces that have helped you get to this point. And more importantly, your offensive line has really solidified itself into a really sturdy unit. So I feel like entering this game, the Bears have nothing to lose. The Packers are the ones that are more desperate to win. And can't believe I'm actually saying this. I actually think the Bears are going to be able to split the series. I mean, they did so last year when nobody thought so, but I think at home and with a Bears offense going up against a Packers defense without 2 of its top defensive linemen, I think they're going to run the football extremely well, but more then I think it'll be enough. But that if you put the ball in Jordan Love's hands in the final 2 minutes, then you might be in trouble. So we'll see what happens there. But I think that the Bears are going to be able to win a very tight grudge match here, 27-24. Bear down. I really just died inside saying that. All right. Let's move on to Sunday afternoon's festivities here. We got the New Jersey Jets taking on the New Orleans Saints, and I get it. You got a 3-11 team taking on a 4-10 team here, so you would think it's an even fight on the surface, but let's be honest. I think that the Saints are just a stronger football team here, and I know that's not saying much, but let's face it. The Jets defense has yet to record an interception, and we have 3 games left in the year. They just fired their defensive coordinator, Steve Wilks, who wasn't really an inspiring, assistant coach to begin with. And Brady Cook is going to be making his second start in the NFL. And I get it. A lot of the struggles aren't on him, or they're not completely his fault. But last week, He threw 3 interceptions. He only had, a couple. I mean, he had one big touchdown drive early in the game that was able to cut it to 7. And then there was a 48-yard return touchdown from Isaiah Williams that got called back due to a penalty, and everything just fell apart from there. And the only other time that they got back in the end zone, the only other 2 times really that they got back in the end zone took place in garbage time, and they just had no shot. But then again, when your offense is literally just Breece Hall and a bunch of, backups and third stringers. One of my Jets friends was telling me this. It's just like watching a preseason game, and it's just really, really depressing. I mean, Trevor Lawrence had the game of his life with 6 total touchdowns. Travis Etienne had 3 touchdown receptions on as many catches, and he didn't even have that great of a game running the football, but he was still absolutely unstoppable, well, in terms of fantasy. And Jaguars, they only punted the ball, once or twice the entire afternoon? So they were just near flawless, and they completely ripped apart the Jets from start to finish. The Saints, they're coming off another upset win against a division rival, this time to the Carolina Panthers. They were down 17-7 in the third quarter, and not only did the defense tighten up and keep Bryce Young out of the end zone the rest of the day, but Tyler Shough, once again, showed up in the clutch with not only a game-tying touchdown drive, but another game-winning drive in the final minutes to set up a winning field goal attempt for Charlie Smith. And Tyler Shough was the one that drew a personal foul penalty on the rookie safety Ransom that set up the field goal attempt in the first place. So I'm going to be honest here. Tyler Shough, he's starting to grow on me. I definitely still think he has a long way to go when it comes to his development, but listen, you give him some help and you put some quality pieces around him, this guy could definitely be a top 15 quarterback in the league. Like, I'm starting to see a lot of the upside that a lot of draft scouts had on him at the beginning of the year or, before the draft. He's still 3-3 as a starter, but you see the plays that he makes. You see how elusive he is in the pocket. You know how opportunistic he is down the stretch. This is a guy that you could really build around. And I think if you're Kellen Moore, you have to love what you see, and you're thinking to yourself, man, I wonder why we didn't start him in the first place. And when you look at their final 3 games of the season, you got the Jets, you got the Falcons, and the Titans. You can easily win out the final 3 games a year and, have yourself a better season than you could have expected at the start of the year with Spencer Rattler. So I think that the Saints are going to win this game handily. I feel like as long as you don't screw up and as long as you just, manage the game well to your perfection, I think the defense can lead the way from start to finish. And I think that the offense will wear the Jets down as long as possible. But the thing is, no Alvin Kamara, no Devin Neal. You're not really going to have a consistent running game. They activated Naeem Hines-Miller off the practice squad, who is 2 years removed from a freakish accident that knocked him out of football for the last couple of years. So you really don't know what you have in terms of a ground game, but you still have Chris Olave and Juwan Johnson. No Tavon Bailey. He's ruled out with an injury. So, one of your big guys from last week, not going to be able to play. But I still think Tyler Shough versus Brady Cook, I don't really think it's up for debate. I'd rather take the Saints quarterback here, 26-13. Now we get to another less exciting matchup. We got the Buffalo Bills versus the Cleveland Browns. So the Browns got absolutely demolished by the Chicago Bears, 31-3. I mean, the defense didn't really have any answers for Caleb Williams. And yes, I get it. Myles Garrett is only 1.5 sacks away from breaking the single season sack record. But at the same time, I mean, they couldn't stop the run. Caleb Williams, sliced and diced that secondary for most of the afternoon. And more importantly, it was probably the worst start of Shedeur Sanders' career. Actually, it was, because he went 18 of 35, didn't have a touchdown pass, threw 3 interceptions, and the only points that they scored was because of a 4th down stop near midfield. So I really think that if it wasn't for that, this would have been the water for months, but I think it's set in stone now. They're 3-11 again, and Kevin Stefanski is probably going to get fired. The Bills, they needed to win badly against the Patriots last week, and they got off to as horrible of a start as you could have asked for. They were down 21-0 early on. They were down 24-7 at halftime, but from the start of the third quarter up until the end of the game, they were flat out tremendous. Josh Allen was sensational. James Cook really helped give this offense a spark. They ended up going on, what was it, a 28 7 run in the entire second half. Josh Allen went 13 of 15 for 150 plus yards with 3 touchdown passes and no interceptions. The defense, on the other hand, played as well as you could have expected. I mean, they did give up a long touchdown run to Travion Henderson that gave the Patriots a lead in the fourth quarter, but Drake May did not play well in the second half. I think he only completed 5 passes, threw a bad interception that allowed the Buffalo Bills to seize momentum. And yes, you could point out the injuries to Robert Spillane and Milton Williams as to why the defense couldn't do anything, but the Bills didn't have Terrell Bernard or their top cornerback, Christian Benford. So I'm not using injuries as an excuse. In my mind, the better quarterback won, and he was the biggest reason why the Bills still have a chance to win the AFC East. And I know everybody is extremely happy that the Patriots lost, because if you look at everybody else's power rankings, a lot of them are starting to fall out of the top 5. And I know there were a few that, kept them at the 3 or the 4 spot, myself included, but a lot of people are saying, see, we told you that the Patriots aren't as good as you think. So that's giving a lot of, fans and pundits, a lot of leverage here. But back to this game, I think the Bills, they're going to win easily. I think as long as you take Quinshon Judkins out of the game plan, you're going to shut this Cleveland Browns offense down. And as great as Myles Garrett is, he's can't be the only reason why this Browns defense is legit. As long as the Bills just run the football, and as long as, Josh Allen doesn't have to do too much, then I think they'll be fine. I think that this will be a convincing blowout win. And I say the final score is 30-6. So give Buffalo a chance to win that game. And if they win, and if the Texans lose, or if the Colts lose, then Buffalo is officially back in the playoffs. So kudos to them. And I think that's the only other playoff implication that I didn't miss, right? Yeah, I think that's it. We got plenty more to go, though, so let's see what happens. Next up, we have the Tennessee Titans versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Oh, boy. Well, the Titans, I mean, they predictably lost to the 49ers. Offense was actually a lot better than I thought they would. Tony Pollard ran for 100 yards. Cam Ward had 170 yards with 2 touchdown passes. They had a few quality scoring drives, but the defense, they couldn't force a punt the entire game. Brock Purdy had 290-plus yards with 3 touchdown passes and no interceptions. Yeah, I mean, they pretty much, 49ers, they pretty much just took care of business. They did what they needed to do. And yeah, the defense didn't play up to standard, but they never let the game get out of hand. It was 31-10 at one point. Actually, it was a 7-point game at halftime, but a missed field goal from Joey Sly kind of gave the 49ers the rest of the momentum that they needed. So the better team won, and Tennessee just, got outplayed. It was a lot closer than the final score might entail. So progress. The Kansas City Chiefs, on the other hand, oh boy. So, where do I even start? They had a must-win game at home against the Los Angeles Chargers. And on the opening drive, they looked respectable. They looked like the vintage Chiefs that we were used to seeing. They go right down the field to score a touchdown on the opening drive in 11 plays. They're up 7-0. They're up 13-3 at halftime, or not at halftime, but they were up 13-3 with 30 seconds left in the half. And then all of a sudden, Justin Herbert threw 2 absolute dimes down the field. One to Trey Harris for 37 yards, and the second a touchdown pass to Keandre Lambert-Smith that cut their deficit to 3 at halftime. From that point on, in the second half, it was a gutsy defensive struggle from start to finish. The Chargers only kicked 2 more field goals. Justin Herbert got sacked 4 times. But the Kansas City Chiefs offense, they did nothing. Just absolutely nothing. They went 3 and out on their first 2 possessions in the period. Then Mahomes in the red zone threw an interception down the sideline on a wheel route to Deion Henley. And on the first play after the 2-minute warning, what happened? The year ends with Patrick Mahomes lying down on the field because he tore his ACL, knocking him out for the rest of the season and officially ending Kansas City's chances of making the playoffs. Gardner Minshew ended up taking over through the rest of the game and got them in a field goal range, but sealed the deal with an interception to Derwin James, pulling off the sweep for the Chargers and officially eliminating Kansas City from playoff contention. So them winning the AFC West again, over. Them making the AFC Championship once again, done. Casual fans want to be excited. and say, oh my gosh, the dynasty is over. We don't have to watch the Chiefs in the playoffs again. But this isn't even something to celebrate about. This is flat out sad. And it's flat out depressing because not only are the Chiefs eliminated from the playoffs, but they just lost their face of the franchise for the rest of the season and quite possibly into next year as well. I know that they're saying that they're trying to get him back for week 1 in 2026 because it's a 9-month recovery period. But I saw Robert Griffin III. I watched what he had to say on the injury, and I agree with him. They should probably give him some time to recover and not have to start right away the next season just because of the timing of the injury. And honestly, when you hear Robert Griffin III talk about that, you should probably listen to what he has to say, because in 2012, when he went down, he tried to come back from it. It ended up costing him. And when he tried to recover and when he tried to come back the next year, he looked like a shell of himself. So the last thing you want if you're Patrick Mahomes is for the same fate to happen, because he's too valuable to this league for it to ever happen in any conceivable way. So I'm hurting for the guy. I'm wishing him a speedy recovery because the NFL needs Patrick Mahomes. And I think it's a lot better I think it's in a way better state when he's on the field. So it definitely sucks. It's heartbreaking, but at the same time, the Chiefs just had way too many flaws all season long. Nobody wanted to believe that they would actually miss the playoffs, myself included. I honestly can't blame anybody else for thinking that they would still make the playoffs because you just wanted to be on the ride for as long as possible. But the running game is absolutely a circus. The offensive line is incredibly battered. It's down to third-string tackles, a backup right guard, and the defense, they tend to fall apart at the worst possible time. And you're hoping that you can finish out the final 3 games of the season on a high note, but I just really don't know what to expect. I mean, when it doesn't have Patrick Mahomes, you could just tell in the preseason and in garbage time moments, they just don't have the depth. They don't have any good backup depth or third string depth to kind of carry the mantle here. So that's why I'm actually kind of giving the Titans a chance to pull off the upset here. I think it's going to be a really ugly game. I think they'll win 17-14, but just without Patrick Mahomes, your offense is just going to go absolutely nowhere. And I really don't know what to expect from your defense here. I expect them to play well, but who even knows anymore? So let's move on to this next one here. We got the Chargers and the Cowboys. So LA needs a win plus a Texans or a Colts loss to make it into the playoffs. They obviously need to get the first part of the equation done, get a win over the Dallas Cowboys. So the Chargers defense, they played absolutely outstanding against the Kansas City Chiefs. They came up with 5 sacks and 2 takeaways. They didn't allow a single point in the second half, and they didn't let the Chiefs get back in the end zone after the opening drive. The Cowboys, on the other hand, they had a must-win game at home against the Minnesota Vikings. And not only did the defense make J.J. McCarthy look like Tom Brady, but midway through the second quarter, the Cowboys were up 14-7. Okay, the second play of the game, Quinton Williams gets an interception off a deflection from Donovan Wilson. They fake a field goal, and it allows them to take an early 7-0 lead. And you think to yourself, okay, Dallas is going to seize all the momentum. They're probably going to make this into a blowout. And instead, the exact opposite happened. It was 14-14 before you knew it. And then all of a sudden, the offense, they didn't have any trouble moving the football down the field, but they just couldn't reach the end zone the rest of the night. They settled for 6 field goal attempts for Brandon Aubrey, and to everybody's surprise, he missed 2 of them, and they were from makeable distance. And Minnesota not only took advantage of those miscues, but in the fourth quarter, they really found a way to put this game out of reach. And I know they only lost by 8 points, but the only reason why it was even that way is because the Cowboys decided to kick a late desperation field goal with maybe 10 seconds left or less than a minute, whatever the situation may be. The point was, Minnesota's offense was absolutely incredible. J.J. McCarthy, without any real semblance of a running game, and with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison held to 2 catches, absolutely balled out and probably had the best game of his young season so far. And like I said, Dak Prescott didn't have a horrible game, had, well over 290 yards. CeeDee Lamb caught 6 passes for 111. Javonte Williams had close to 100. But when you slow down George Pickens, And when you keep Dallas out of the end zone and you just play a bend but don't break strategy, it can pay off. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. So I think now that the Cowboys only have a 1% chance of the playoffs, if the Eagles win, they're done. They're officially eliminated from playoff contention. And over the last in their last two matchups against the Chargers, Dallas was able to, make enough plays to win both those games, but they don't have to worry about Brandon Staley being on the other sideline. They got to deal with Jim Harbaugh. And I think now that the Chargers are well better coached and that they have the offensive firepower to really, slow down one of the worst defenses in the league, I think they will make enough plays to, make sure that they're one step away from making the playoffs. So I got the Chargers winning this one 28-21. I expect Dak Prescott to have somewhat of a good game, but when you're going up against one of the stronger defenses in the National Football League, you really have to play near perfect. And if George Pickens is still going to be able to, is George Pickens is still not going to be a huge focal point of the offense the way he hasn't been over the last couple of weeks, then I just really don't know how much left the Cowboys have besides Javonte Williams and CeeDee Lamb. So that's my reasoning here. But anyways, now we have the Vikings and the Giants. So I'm going to cut this short. I think the Vikings are going to win in a blowout. I think, JJ McCarthy has played exceptional ball over the last couple of weeks. Kevin O'Connell has this team, playing with the right kind of mindset, even with them being eliminated from playoff contention. And Giants, they are on a really, really long losing streak here. And I know Jackson Dart is the only reason why this team even has a spark, but he is going to go through hell if he thinks he can get away with this reckless style of play against Brian Flores in that group. I understand that Jonathan Grenard is out for the rest of the season, but, I mean, Brian Flores loves to blitz. They're going to throw a lot of pressure at Jackson Dart from every conceivable angle possible, and he's going to really need to have a near perfect game for the Giants to even have a chance, because one little slip up or one costly mistake, and Minnesota is running with that in a heartbeat. I think if they run the football extremely well the way that they couldn't last week, then I think it won't even be a close finish. So I'll say they win this one 31-10. All right. Now we have the Bengals and the Dolphins. This one is going to be really interesting to watch. And I get it. Both teams are eliminated from playoff contention, but let me explain why. So the Bengals, they just flat out quit against the Baltimore Ravens. They looked dead in the water. And the ironic part was that they held the ball for 39 minutes and still got shut out 24-0. They gave up 189 yards on the ground. Yeah, they forced an interception, but that was because Zay Flowers dropped a wide open pass. And truth be told, the score should have been a lot worse if it weren't for a couple bad drops. But Lamar Jackson was sharp. The offense ran the ball extremely well. They didn't really even need to do much in the second half, but they did a good job of playing keep away. The Bengals offense, on the other hand, could specifically with Joe Burrow, he looked like he just wanted that season to end. Only 225 yards, 2 interceptions, one of them a pick six that just completely put the game out of reach. And when you hear the comments that he's made over the past couple of weeks and just, the inklings that, he might not want to be here anymore and that he might be thinking of life outside of football. You know what? If I'm Joe Burrow, when this season's over, I am asking for a trade. This team is going to waste this guy's career. Hell, they're already doing it right now. I mean, their defense is absolutely atrocious. The offensive line has been a weakness all season long. Zach Taylor has lost his touch in the locker room. And I get that you have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, but those three right there, Burrow, Chase, and Higgins, they're the only reason why this team is even relevant and why they're even worth talking about. Like, Joe Burrow does not deserve anything that he's had to deal with since he's arrived at Cincinnati. The injuries that have piled up, the wasted seasons that, have been under his watch. It's just flat out sad. And it's looking like Andrew Luck and Dan Marino all over again, where it's just, you have a generational quarterback that most teams would die to have, and yet it's going to be wasted by self-inflicted ineptitude from everybody else. So if I'm Joe Burrow, I'm just trying to find a way to get out of there and look to go to a team that's, actually has a real chance of winning, because the Cincinnati Bengals, they're not going anywhere. Their defense has no depth whatsoever. there's nothing else there that makes them a destination franchise. And it's just really sad and unfortunate to watch. But going up against the Miami Dolphins, they're not in that much different of a situation here because if you didn't hear already, the Dolphins have officially benched Tua Tagovailoa for 7th-round rookie Quinn Ewers. And not only that, but Zach Wilson is the backup. So Tua is going to be the emergency third-string guy, and it's pretty much means that his time in Miami is coming to an end. I'm definitely torn on this one. Obviously, Amanda's lost his job, and I feel for him and his family, but let's be real. This season was absolutely horrendous from him. He leads the league in interceptions with 15. This was the year that they really had to do something for them to, not have a blow up in the next offseason. And instead, Tyreek Hill is definitely gone. He's already been out with a torn ACL, but you could just tell that he was just trying to get out of there. Chris Greer, the general manager, got fired. We thought Mike McDaniel would be the next to go, but clearly he's gotten this team back in the right direction. They're 6-8 now, but considering where they were 2 months ago, it's definitely a huge sign of improvement. But last week was, their chance to finally prove that they could do something. Monday Night Football on the road against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and instead they let a massive egg. They were down 28-3 at one point in the fourth quarter. They ended up losing 28-15, but 2 late touchdown drives in garbage time will give you the false notion that, they weren't so bad. Yeah, they had no chance of winning. Tua ended up throwing another interception. They only had 3 points in the first half. They didn't score until the game was out of reach. And Mike Tomlin essentially said, you can't really run the football. You got to win the game by yourself. And he couldn't live up to the challenge. And now that he's benched, you don't really know where to go if you're the Miami Dolphins. He's going to be owed $53 million next year. And there's not a team in the world that wants to take on a huge chunk of his salary. So the Dolphins are essentially going to have to release him and take on a huge amount of dead cap as a result. Whether it's a post-June cut or not, it's still a crap ton of money that you got to take on. And if you're Mike McDaniel, you had to make this decision because you're just trying to keep your job. And I think because you're eliminated from playoff contention, you just have to say to yourself, all right, let's see what I have in Quinn Ewers. Let's see if he can really, do anything in these final 3 weeks to lead us to think that, he could be our starting guy moving forward. And if he's not, then they are absolutely screwed because they're not going to have the cap space to really go after somebody really big in free agency. And in the draft, I don't really know what other quarterbacks there are that, could help you out besides Fernando Mendoza. I mean, even then you really don't know what you have in him because, just because you won the Heisman last year doesn't mean that, you're automatically going to be like Joe Burrow and immediately turn a franchise around. You need to see what you have in him. But, I'm not going to put too much stock into, what Quinn Ewers can do against Cincinnati. I'm just going to take the wait and see approach. I would like to see him have a good game because the Bengals defense has not been great all season long. But at the same time, you really don't know what you have. So if he plays well, that's great. If he doesn't, then you just hope that they can end the final 2 games on a high note. So I think in this game, I got the Bengals winning just simply because you still have Joe Burrow. And I think as long as, you don't play too over your heads and as long as you don't make any big mistakes in the long run, then you should do enough to win. But I don't think it's going to be a blowout at all. I think it'll be really close. I think Quinn Ewers will have a generally good game, but we're going to be able to see what he's finally made of. And I think if it does turn into a close game in the fourth quarter, then I feel like you got to trust Joe Burrow more than a rookie making his first start. So I'll say they win with a pretty weird score. I'll say they win this one 27-22. All right, let's get to the final 1 o'clock game on the window. We have the Bucs and the Panthers. Oh, boy. These final 3 weeks are going to be huge for these two teams. Tampa Bay, all they needed to do was beat the Atlanta Falcons, and they would have the upper hand in the division. They were up 28-14 in the fourth quarter. The Falcons committed 19 penalties, and yet they still completely choked the game away. Todd Bowles learned absolutely nothing from last year because Kirk Cousins once again absolutely lit up that Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. He had 373 yards, 3 touchdown passes, no interceptions. Keep in mind, he didn't have Drake London again for a 4th straight week. Bijan Robinson was absolutely dynamic. Kyle Pitts had the game of his life, 11 catches, 166 yards, 3 touchdown receptions, and down 28-14. The Falcons scored 15 unanswered points and scored off a walk-off field goal because the Buccaneers couldn't hold the Falcons off on 3rd and 28 and 4th and 14. It's unacceptable. And if the Buccaneers somehow miss the playoffs, Todd Bowles, you can kiss your job goodbye. Because since he's been the head coach, they have been able to coast off a very cakewalk division, and they haven't even been able to secure it until the final 2 weeks of the season. So that's a damning indictment on yourself. And anytime you do make the playoffs, you haven't been able to get past the second round, and you just flat out get exposed by a stronger opponent. And I feel like if you do win this division again, that same fate is going to happen, because if the season ended, you'd be playing the Seattle Seahawks. So don't have a whole lot of confidence there. I understand you beat them earlier in the year, but just because you beat them once doesn't mean you could do it again. Or it doesn't mean it's easy to do it a second time. So, yeah. The Buccaneers offense, they flat out disintegrated in the final 10 minutes. And defensively, they got flat out carved up. And it's why they have allowed the 3rd most passing yards in the National Football League. And it's why that defense is flat out abysmal. And with their top corner, Zion McCollum on IR, it's probably going to be worse in the final 3 games. The Panthers, they don't get a slap on the wrist either. You were up 17-7 against the Saints. The game was in the palm of your hands, and one failed 4th down stop caused the offense to just completely shut down and go into quicksand. And meanwhile, the defense just flat out laid an egg against Tyler Shough and an offense that didn't have a really strong running attack and whose best receiver was Devon Vele. And I get it. I like Tyler Shough. I like the progress that he's made since he's been the starter. But if you're Carolina, you had a chance to take the lead in the division, and you let that fall out of the palm of your hands. So entering Bank of America Stadium, you don't really know what's going to happen. Because anytime you think the Panthers are going to win, they completely suck. And when you don't have any expectations for them, they somehow pull a rabbit out of their ass and find a way to win the game. I mean, think about it. 1 week, you beat the Rams, and then 2 weeks later, you somehow lose to the Saints. That's how incredibly frustrating this franchise has been. And if you're the Buccaneers, they've been absolutely abysmal since the bye week. They've lost 5 out of their last 6, and if they're not careful, they could very well lose this one to Carolina when you consider how both of these teams stack up against each other. And if you're Dave Canales, who was the former offensive coordinator for the Bucs a couple years ago, you are definitely licking your lips, because you definitely know you have the offense that's capable of beating this Bucs defense, and more importantly, your defense is well improved to make Baker Mayfield, make a couple of mistakes here. So I got to be honest. For Tampa to avoid that, they need to have their most complete performance of the season on all 3 phases. Okay? Otherwise, you're going to give the Panthers enough breathing room to pull some magic late in the final minute or so. And I would not want to be in that situation, because they can run the ball well. Bryce Young has definitely, the capability of, pulling off game-winning drives. And defensively, they're not exactly great, but they're just like the Falcons. They can definitely force you to screw up at the worst possible moment. So I'm going to say that the Panthers pull off this upset here, 26-23. Now let's get into the late afternoon window. We have the Broncos and the Jags. So we've got one heck of a grudge match coming up in Mile High. And as much as I want to see the Jaguars try to end the Broncos' 11-game winning streak, I just feel like the Broncos are a little stronger of a football team. They have a way better defense. I definitely trust Bo Nix to get it done in the 4th quarter than Trevor Lawrence, but the Jaguars have been absolutely incredible in their last 5 games. And Trevor Lawrence has been a huge reason why. And it's, the biggest reason. Since that choke job to the Houston Texans, they've taken first place in the AFC South. And I really like what I'm seeing from them on both sides of the ball. But I feel like with Denver, they're just as great at stopping the run. They have a quarterback that has 6 game-winning drives this season alone. And I feel like, you know, I feel like when you're at home with, the elevated, conditions to your advantage, I just feel like that they're going to be able to make enough plays down the stretch that will, keep them over the top. And really, it just comes down to how Trevor Lawrence can do in, the final 15 minutes. Because while I certainly think he's capable, I feel like, on the road, you still really need to, see what, you really need to see what he could do. So I think it'll be a really close game. I think the Denver Broncos will be able to hold on, though, 24-17, because we all know that, the Broncos are just, I don't remember the last time they actually won a game by double digits or put a game, or I mean, I know a couple weeks ago they, should have beaten the Raiders handedly, but somehow, some way they only won that one by 7. So there you go. Denver wins 24-17. Let's move on. Got the Falcons and the Cardinals. So both of them are officially eliminated from playoff contention. Arizona got the doors blown off by the Houston Texans 40-20. All it took was the second play of the game, a 57-yard touchdown to Nico Collins, and then a fumble recovery on the ensuing kickoff for the game to get out of hand. And we all know what the Arizona Cardinals usually do in those situations. They get blown out. They look dead in the water, but they end up putting a bunch of numbers in garbage time, and they end up having, a lot of good empty calorie stats that mean nothing in the long run. I mean, yeah, Trey McBride, 12 catches, 130-plus yards, 2 touchdown receptions, but you still lost by 20 points, and you let the Texans offense have their best game of the season. So don't really get a lot of sympathy from me. The Falcons, they're going to need to have a way cleaner game than they did the last week. Now, it was enough to overcome a 14-point deficit to Tampa Bay, but there's no excuse for you to, have another one of those games where you stock up a lot of penalties and you somehow barely beat the Arizona Cardinals, because you're second in the league in sacks, and Jacoby Brissett has been sacked 31 times in 9 games. You should be able to win this game pretty handily, especially against a Cardinals team that has been on a really long losing streak. And when you have Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts, and when you've got Drake London returning to practice after missing the last 4 weeks with that knee injury, you should be able to have enough firepower to win this game. So I got the Falcons winning. I think that they, build enough momentum to make sure that Raheem Morris doesn't get canned at the end of the year. But the final score for me, I'm going to say they win this one 27-24. All right, Raiders versus Texans. I'm not even gonna give a whole summary about this. Geno Smith is coming back, but it doesn't even matter. Texans win 38-6. This is just gonna be a blowout, and I don't even think it'll be close. Steelers versus Lions. Pittsburgh's offense was absolutely sharp on Monday night against the Miami Dolphins. Aaron Rodgers, only 4 incompletions, 220-plus yards, 2 touchdown passes, and they were up 28-3 at one point. They took care of business at home, and they made sure that they had the upper leg of the division. And if they beat Detroit, not only did they possibly eliminate the Lions from playoff contention for good, but Mike Tomlin gets another winning season for the 19th straight year, which is flat out absurd when you really think about it in the grand scheme of things. The Lions, we already talked about them. They came off an unfortunate loss to the Los Angeles Rams, had a big lead in the first half, got off to a really strong start. And then second half, the offense couldn't really do much of anything until it was too late. And the defense just had no answers for, the firepower that the Rams offense had. But normally coming off a loss, they've won 15 straight. Their running game, gets back into a groove. Jared Goff is able to, lead a lot of good scoring drives down the field to put the game out of reach, and the defense just makes enough plays to make sure that they hang on for a win. So I feel like the Lions are going to follow that same script and dive into that same mold. I think it'll be a really close game. I think we're going to have a tour de force from both offenses, especially since Aaron Rodgers is back in the Motor City. But I think that the Lions, they have more firepower offensively, and if they can run the football a lot better, then I think it'll be a no-brainer. So I think the Lions will win this one 30-28. And just as I say that, I realized I skipped over a couple of playoff implications. So with the Broncos and the Jags, there's a lot on the line for this one. The Jaguars, they need a win, plus a Texans loss or a Colts loss, and they're in the playoffs. the Denver Broncos, if they win and if the Chargers lose, they get the AFC West. If that happens, plus the Bills lose and the Patriots lose, Denver officially has the number 1 seed in the AFC, and they have home field advantage throughout the playoffs. So, wanted to get that out of the way. My apologies. Now let's get into the primetime games. We got the Patriots and the Ravens on Sunday Night Football. Patriots, all they need is a win, and they're in. And if that doesn't happen, well, they better hope that the Colts and Texans lose. I did pick the Patriots to beat the Buffalo Bills last week, but I'm not completely surprised that the Bills won. I knew we had a big chance of losing, but the way for it to happen, it was definitely deflating, and it was whelming and humbling. I mean, they were up 21-0, and all of a sudden it's 28-24, and then they ended up winning 35-31. Like I said, the bottom line was that Josh Allen was way better than Drake May, especially in the second half. I mean, I could point out the fact that we didn't have Robert Spillane or Milton Williams, but the Bills didn't have Terrell Bernard or Christian Benford, and the Patriots offense still couldn't really do much of anything in the second half besides a long touchdown run from Travion Henderson. So we ran the football extremely well, and it looked like the passing game was really coming into the fold, but, Buffalo did what they needed to do. They made a lot of great adjustments after halftime, and, like I said, the better quarterback won. So can't really take anything away from the Bills here. And if you're entering this game on Sunday Night Football, you better hope to God you don't lose this one. Because even though Lamar Jackson isn't at 100%, you still got to go up against that tank known as Derrick Henry. And if they watched that game plan, if they watched that game film last week, you would know that they are going to have a heavy ground and pound attack against this Patriots defense that has not been great against the run lately. They're starting to dip down in a lot of statistical categories here. And yeah, I'm not so confident about my defense, but offensively, you need to bounce back because this Ravens defense has a lot of playmakers on all 3 levels. One of them, a former Patriot, and Kyle Van Noy, that had an interception and he pulled off an assist in a pick 6 as he just handed it off to Alohi Gilman, who took it to the house. But you got Kyle Van Noy on the D-line, still got Roquan Smith in your linebacking level, and secondary, you still got Kyle Hamilton and Marlon Humphrey to worry about. So you cannot underestimate this Baltimore defense, no matter where they are ranked, statistically, because you make one little slip up, I don't care how healthy Lamar Jackson is. The one that you can't do is get off to a slow start and play exactly the way you did in the second half against the Buffalo Bills. So I think that the Patriots will be able to bounce back, but it's cautious optimism for me. It'll be a really close game, 26-23, but let's be real. It could really go either way here. Monday Night Football, we got the 49ers and the Colts. Phillip Rivers is back in the saddle for a second straight week, but let's face it, I don't really care what happens. I don't think they have enough to beat the 49ers because we've seen it really since Daniel Jones has been starting. You take Jonathan Taylor out of the game plan, Indianapolis' offense, they don't really go anywhere. The fact that this was even a close game against the Seattle Seahawks last week, it was absolutely surprising. But the defense, they really did everything they could. They didn't give up a touchdown, but, Indianapolis, it took a 60-yard field goal just for them to take the lead. Phillip Rivers only had 120 yards, threw an interception at the end that sealed the deal. And, when it was time for Indianapolis to get a stop, they just, they couldn't. And, Jason Myers made all 6 of his field goals to win the game. And, Sam Darnold just ended up having a better game than Phillip Rivers, bottom line. And I think with the 49ers, you're dealing with a bit of a tougher challenge because Christian McCaffrey is still one of the top 5 running backs in all of football. Their offense has, they might not have a Jackson Smith and Jigba, but you have a lot more, exceptional depth pieces like Ricky Pearsall and Jawan Jennings and Demarcus Robinson and George Kittle. And Brock Purdy has been playing absolutely fantastic since coming back from that toe injury. So you really know that, the 49ers offense is going to be a lot more dynamic than the Seattle Seahawks. And their defense is just as sturdy of a unit with Robert Saleh calling the plays. I don't think it's going to be a blowout, but my indication is that it'll be another scrappy game. You would think that it would be, a 1-point or a 2-point game entering the fourth quarter, but I feel like the 49ers is just a little bit more lethal, and they'll make enough plays down the stretch to pull away. I say they get the job done 24-14. And there you have it. The week 16 picks are officially locked in. But before I close off, let's just look at the standings to see where everybody's at. So obviously, Denver Broncos are still, on a 12-game win streak. The Chargers would be in the playoffs with an 11-4 record. The Patriots, they would maintain the AFC East lead at 12-3, and the Buffalo Bills wouldn't get knocked out. The Texans would then take the lead in the AFC South, while the Jaguars are the 7th seed, which is crazy to think about. And then you still have the Steelers, leading the AFC North. And wow, this is an incredibly weak division. My God. But that's what you have in the AFC. The NFC West, it is still incredibly stacked, but if everything goes as I think, you still have the Rams at the number 1 seed, and then the 49ers would, leap ahead of the Seahawks because they beat Seattle in week 1. NFC North, you got Chicago at the 2 seed, which is flat out crazy, while the Packers would be a 7 seed for a 3rd straight season. Philly obviously would take the NFC East, and then Carolina would take the NFC South. So it's going to be a fun week, and I can't wait to see what we have, coming up in the pipeline. But thank you all so much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe for additional content. Thank you for dialing in with me. Hope you have a great rest of your week, everyone. So long.